Hey everyone, welcome to Things We Said Today, a Beatle video podcast that deals with anything and everything having to do with the Beatles together or apart. Um, we come to you every other week. It's what we try to do bi-weekly and have different topics to discuss having to do with the Beatles and the four individual Beatles. We have guests often. Hopefully you enjoyed last week's show or our last show with Elliot Mintz. My name is Darren Devivo. I'm from WFUV Radio in New York City and 90.7 FM and WFUV.org, where I've been broadcasting since, 1984. And I'm joined by my very close friends and fellow Beatle nuts, Ken Michaels, who is to my left. I don't know where he is on your screen. Ken's been in broadcasting a little longer than I have, hosting over that period of time many Beatles shows and Beatles related shows. Currently, Every Little Thing is a syndicated radio show. And he's got a YouTube channel, which is called Ken Michaels Radio. Even though it's a YouTube channel, he calls it Ken Michaels Radio. And on Ken Michaels Radio, he always has very cool guests and contests and keep that word in mind. And Ken's been doing his thing for a long time. And when you want to talk about a Beatle expert, he's the guy that pops into my head. And it gives me pleasure to welcome Ken. Hello, Ken Michaels.
Hello, Darren. It's great to be
Now,
here. Always great to be doing this show every couple of weeks.
absolutely. I
And
look forward to it every other week and get very depressed when we're not going to do a show and we're off a week extra. Um, and then down below me, I don't know where he is on your screen, is a writer, journalist, critic, guitarist, and overall nice guy, Allan Kozinn, who's actually been writing longer than Ken's been broadcasting and I've been broadcasting. It's all in that 40-year window. It's pretty interesting. For many years, Allan was with the New York Times and has written a number of Beatle books. And also, today you can read him in a variety of different publications. But these days, the focus is on, you see the red and blue books to Allan's, well, that would be your left, your right, and the left on the screen. Allan, along with Adrian Sinclair, the author of The Essential Guides to Paul McCartney. The McCartney Legacy Volume 1 book is the red one, and the brand new one, The McCartney Legacy Volume 2, 1974 to 1980, is coming out. And we're about 2 weeks away, I think, give or take a few days, December 10th. That's the blue book that's next to the red one. And those are the first two volumes of what's going to be hopefully 4 or 5 volumes. Allan, howdy.
Hey Darren, and hey Ken, and hello everyone out there.
So again, I hope you enjoyed, and it was a really wonderful show. We were all buzzing about it when we were finished recording it with Elliot Mintz. I hope you enjoyed that last week. As for today, I won't get into too much detail yet, hold it off. But today's sort of a part one because the next show is going to be related to this one. And we've got something cool waiting for you at the end of this show. But first, the news. Ken's got that. Take it away, Ken.
okay. Well, since our last show wasn't that long ago, there isn't as much news as I normally bring, but still some interesting things that have happened in the past couple of weeks. First, we note the passing of British studio guitarist Vic Flick, who will always be best known for having played the guitar part for the ever-popular James Bond theme. His connection to the Beatles is on a few recordings. He is the sole guitarist listed for Paul McCartney's instrumental version of his Ram album, Thrillington. Vic played the 12-string guitar on Peter and Gordon's #1 hit penned by McCartney, A World Without Love, and he also played with the George Martin Orchestra for the instrumental version of This Boy, Ringo's theme, as heard in the Beatles' first film, A Hard Day's Night. That's his guitar playing that you hear on that. Flick appeared on many hit records, including early hits for Tom Jones like It's Not Unusual, Petula Clark's Downtown, Herman's Hermits, Silhouettes. Flick died from complications from Alzheimer's disease on November 14th. He was 87.
Hmm.
Paul McCartney performed on November 17th at the Corona Capital Music Festival in Mexico City. And at the finale of the concert, Paul and his band jammed on The End with special guests Jack White, known for his years in the White Stripes and his solo music, and St. Vincent, who actually covered Paul's song Women and Wives for the McCartney 3 Imagined album. Paul will be playing dates in France, Spain, and the UK in December from the 4th to the 19th for a total of 8 dates. And Paul and his wife Nancy were seen in Manhattan yesterday on November the 24th, attending the premiere of the new Beatles documentary film, Beatles 64. This was at the Hudson Square Theater, where they walked arm in arm along the red carpet. Paul posed for photos with Martin Scorsese, Steven Van Zandt, and Chris Rock. Beatles 64 will be available for streaming on Disney Plus this coming week, starting Friday, November the 29th. Darren just said to me before we started the show that he believes Sean was there for the premiere and Olivia Harrison too.
Olivia Harrison, I believe I heard also, yeah.
Okay, very nice. Ringo Starr has given a few interviews so far to promote his upcoming country album, Look Up, due out on January the 10th. Ringo will be giving 2 concerts at the famous Ryman Auditorium in Nashville on January 14th and 15th. And he says the concerts will be a mixture of old songs and new songs from Look Up. He said he plans on doing a country version of With a Little Help from My Friends. And there's word that a TV special is in the works, made of Ringo's country concerts, if you will, at the Ryman. All right, something there to look forward to. Well, the song Blackbird has had a big year in 2024, with Beyonce covering the song on her latest album and getting permission, by the way, from Paul to use his guitar playing from the White Album on her version. Now Art Garfunkel has covered the song. He just made a brand new album with his son, Art Garfunkel Jr. The album's called Father and Son, named after the Cat Stevens classic. And you can hear the two of them singing the Beatles song together. And they bill themselves on the album as Garfunkel and Garfunkel. Very clever. Luca Parassi's new follow-up book to his essential book on McCartney, Music is Ideas, the story behind the songs 1970 to 1989, has just been released. Originally, Luca told me he didn't want it to come out until Paul's next album was released. But now he says it's taking too long for Paul to put out this album. So he decided to put out the new one, which covers the years 1990 through 2012. Currently, as we speak, there is an auction going on of memorabilia from New York's Hit Factory, where John and Yoko recorded their Double Fantasy and Milk and Honey albums. The auction runs now through December the 4th. These include a platinum album for Double Fantasy, a rare test pressing of the album, a gold record for the Milk and Honey album, gold singles for Just Like Starting Over and Woman, a photo from the final recording session, and more. If you're interested, you can go to this website. Go to bid, dot Eaton, Eaton, Brennan, Brennan, auctions.com. Celebrating a birthday yesterday, November 24th, was Pete Best, who turned 83, and it just so happened that he announced that he will be playing 4 Northeast dates in March next year.
Hmm.
4 dates in a row, March 20th, right in Allan's backyard, Portland, Maine, March 20th.
Huh.
He must have known you lived there. That's why he scheduled it. March 21st in Westerly, Rhode Island, March 22nd, Derry, New Hampshire, and March 23rd in Hudson, New York.
That's my birthday.
March
Although
20th.
Hudson's a little bit of a trip, but
I'm probably going to try the one in Rhode Island myself, but
Yeah, Hudson's a little bit of a trek from where I am, but that's fun. Good for him.
okay. That's all the news I have for you this time.
All right. Thank you, Ken. And now on with the show. And today, as I mentioned before, part one of Beatles 64, we'll call it. Beatles 64, the name of a documentary that Ken made mention of. By the time some of you might have seen it already, because what's the date? November 29th,
29th.
which is a Saturday. Is it Saturday?
This Friday coming up.
It's Friday, the 29th Friday. So this Friday will premiere on Disney Plus. And so it's possible some of you will have seen it by the time you watch this show or listen. For the sake of those who haven't seen it yet, we're going to share our thoughts on it because we've seen it, because we're special. And this is a film that Martin Scorsese's involved with, but it also is a film that relies very heavily on footage that was shot by the Maysles brothers back in 1964. And I hope I'm pronouncing their name right. Um, and when I mentioned that our next show will be a second part, this film tied in with the box set that's already out, which is the 1964 US albums in mono, featuring what essentially is the first 7 official US albums collected together in one box, and then eliminate the Beatles story, and the other 6 albums have been made available and are available individually. So late in the year here, we're celebrating the 60th anniversary of the Beatles' arrival in America with the reissue of those Capitol albums, those US albums, I should say, and the film that we're going to spend time with on today's show, the film Beatles 64. Um, Martin Scorsese is, and I wrote his name down here, and of course did not put what he did, but he's not directing. He produced it, right?
Yeah.
Is that,
I believe
and I
he put,
believe
yeah.
David Tedeschi is the director of this film. And as I mentioned, it uses a lot of footage that was shot in 1964 during those first 2 weeks that the Beatles were in America in February 1964, shot by the Maysles brothers, Albert and David. Um, and it really concentrates on what it was like to be in the eye of that hurricane with the 4 Beatles, trapped, not literally, figuratively trapped in their hotel rooms when they were in New York. They first arrived, going into and coming out of the Ed Sullivan Show appearance, the first one, training down to Washington, D.C., and then down to Southern Florida. And that is the time period that we're talking about in this film. Um, in a nutshell, I enjoyed it, felt it was a little disjointed, but at the same time, um, that shouldn't take away too much from your enjoyment of it. Let's go around the horn here and get the thoughts of Allan and Ken. Allan, you first. What'd you think of Beatles 64?
Mostly I enjoyed it. The 64 footage, I mean, we've seen already 2 releases from Apple called The Beatles' First Visit or some derivative of that title. I think the second one was called something a little different, but uh, and that leaned really heavily on this Maysles Brothers footage that that they compiled and that Apple, I believe, now owns. Um, and I think I said last time, or the last time we mentioned this film, that it seems sort of obvious that the best of that footage would have been in those first 2 releases. So what were they going to do to make this one different? Okay, there is some footage that we hadn't seen, a lot of footage we have seen, um, and they also cut in some of the performances, not complete performances generally, but some of the Sullivan and especially Washington Coliseum performances. And again, the Washington Coliseum show, if any of you haven't seen it, you should get your hands on it because it's an exceptional concert. And it has problems. They've got to turn Ringo's drum riser around, and they end up doing it themselves. I'm amazed there weren't union guys there to do it. That's what it would be today in a theater. Um, but nevertheless, I mean, Ringo's drumming is incredible. The playing's incredible. The singing, it's just a really good performance. One of the best performances that we have on film of the Beatles. Um, so there's some of that, but not a lot. Some, I mean, it's better than nothing. Otherwise, there's a lot of talking head interviews, contemporary talking head interviews, contemporary meaning today. Um, and they made some interesting choices. I mean, I was kind of surprised to see, for instance, Joe Queen in there. I don't really think of Joe Queenan as someone who I would particularly go to for an opinion about the Beatles, but he's written about pop music among the many things he's written about. So why not? Uh, Jamie Bernstein, Leonard Bernstein's daughter. I know
Hmm.
her. And I was just sort of surprised to see her there. But Leonard Bernstein sort of got onto the Beatles very early, and among classical music people, he was among the first. I mean, Leopold Stokowski too. Uh, a lot of classical people were into the Beatles from the start, and so in the Bernstein home, I mean, we got to see a little bit of why Leonard Bernstein had heard so much about the Beatles because Jamie and possibly her sister, she doesn't mention her sister Nina, and they have a brother Alexander. She doesn't mention whether the others were as fanatical as she was about the Beatles, but she does. And then there's a bit of film of Leonard Bernstein talking about them from one of his later television shows because he's talking about music from Revolver, I believe. Um, so let's see what else. Jack Douglas. Jack Douglas makes a really interesting contribution to this because what I never knew, I mean, we all know him as having produced Double Fantasy and I guess Milk and Honey. Um, what I didn't know was that when the Beatles first came out, he sort of found his way to Liverpool on a ship um, and almost wasn't able to get off the ship because he didn't have the right visas or something. And but he managed to get off, get in a band in Liverpool and play. And it turned out that they were on the cover of the Liverpool Echo. And when later on he worked with John, John knew all about that. He said, were you one of those two Yanks that came over? So, also really there were a lot of these talking heads. Smokey Robinson, I thought, was a really good addition because here we have an American musician who influenced the Beatles, whose stuff the Beatles played, and he basically said what it was to them when the Beatles came over. Same with the Isleys, although I believe the Isleys clip wasn't made for this film particularly. It looked like something that was taken from something else. Same with
Hmm.
Little Richard. But yeah, generally speaking, I hear about a documentary like this and I think, okay, we've got modern talking heads and, not to mention today's Paul and Ringo looking back on it. I mean, do we really need that? It's probably best to just see the original stuff and all that. But I think these guys and women actually made some important contributions to the story here and the whole sense of occasion of the Beatles coming over. So I enjoyed it. I'd rather just really watch the Washington Coliseum concert and the Ed Sullivan Show performances and the Raw Mason Brothers film. But if you're going to do a documentary, I think this was a good job.
Ken?
A lot of what Alan just said, I would agree with. I really there's two particular aspects of this documentary that I liked a lot. One were the interviews. Certainly, like Alan said, Smokey Robinson, just to know how he felt about the Beatles recording You Really Got a Hold on Me. And he also made mention that the Beatles were the first group that he was aware of that ever said that they love black artists. Just imagine how a lot of the black artists at the time must have felt knowing that the Beatles were always mentioning their names. You listen to interviews and press conferences at the time, and they're always mentioning Motown artists and Marvin Gaye, for example. You know, the, it meant a lot, I'm sure, to the black artists of that time. Ronnie Spector was really nice. I mean, I'm not sure where the interview came from, but she talked about how when the Beatles came here, that John called her at her house, and John said to her that the Beatles are prisoners of their fame. Um, and This was when John was at the Plaza. And so the Ronettes came to visit them at the hotel, and the Supremes came over. Jay and the Americans came over, and they're all saying, "Gee, we got to take pictures of us with them." And Ronnie said the Beatles wanted to know about everything. They wanted to know about all the artists from the 50s, Chuck Berry and Little Richard, and what kind of food did we eat here in America? What was the popular food? The groups that they listened to, the dancing. And then they went to Harlem. Um, they went to a barbecue where nobody recognized them. They had a,
Ken, how well known is the fact that they went to Harlem with the Ronettes, or at least with just Ronnie Spector? Because I didn't know that.
I heard about that a long
Okay.
time ago. I just didn't know that they went to this barbecue place, and they showed a
Right.
photo of the outside of it, which
Mhm.
was pretty cool. Um, yeah, the Jack Douglas story is fascinating, and he's told that story a few times. What you didn't bring up, Alan, was that he said to Jack, "Yeah, we just released our brand new album, and you ended up being on the front cover of the newspaper." So that could be a big reason why John was very much aware of who Jack was. And Jack also said he played at the Cavern at the time.
Mhm.
I wish I knew what album that was that the Beatles had just put out when Jack Douglas made that.
Yeah, they're kind of vague about the time frame of Jack's voyage. So and as we know, they do skip around in time a little bit in this documentary. I think Darren's going to have more to say about that.
Yeah,
One thing that Jack did give me the impression that he was picked to produce Double Fantasy, quite possibly because of the connection that you know was between him and John with this, him going to Jack going to Liverpool. John picked up something about the fact that this guy from the New York area, as a kid trying to get going with a music career, went to Liverpool. He was on to something. Therefore, um, he's got he's tuned in, as Jack put it,
yeah,
and the next thing you know, he's producing Double Fantasy. So
yeah. I'm pretty sure he's not given a credit on Milk and Honey though.
No.
he isn't,
See, yeah,
but he did. He was very much involved in it. But
yeah. But yeah, the interviews are really good. But what I find myself fascinated with, and sometimes I can't remember if I've seen the footage or not, but how the Beatles reacted to the sudden fame coming to America, the excitement of it all. And it seemed to me that George and Ringo were having a blast throughout this whole thing. You watch their actions on the train, they're clowning around a lot, and so is Paul. John seemed to be a little bit more serious than the others, and there were a few moments there where you kind of saw John staring into space. It's like he was thinking, "Is this what we've worked so hard for?" You know? Is this, what fame is all about? Like he was already questioning it. Maybe I'm building this up in my head, but
I
for
I think
someone like George, who later on would talk about, he was looking for more meaning in life and everything, and he discovered that all this fame and money wasn't everything. You watch him in 1964, he's having a great time through all this. There's a great scene when he's on the train and he's saying, look into the camera, hey, it's me. You know, he's really funny on camera, and so is Ringo and Paul too. They're all very funny. Um, just John had sometimes seemed much more serious than the others.
I think
There
if you
is
watch.
towards the end, when they're in Miami, there's a scene in the hotel room where Ringo's sort of the center of attention. McCartney's wandering around in the room, and he seems a little more serious, like as they're approaching the end of this. It was a 2 week period as they were reaching the end of it. Um, the luster came off maybe a little bit in Paul's mind because he was quiet and contemplative. Um, and this was at the end of the movie.
Hmm.
Um, and Ringo, like I say, was at the center of what was going on in the room at the time. I have to watch it again though, and next time I do see it, and see if I pick up on what you were talking about. Perhaps John was somewhat could he have been overwhelmed because
I
you
think
don't realize because we're from America and we're from the New York area, all three of us. So I'm watching it, not thinking America's big, brash, loud. Okay. And England's a completely different beast. And so to me, it was familiar. But to them, coming here and then everything was louder, bigger, faster. I think there was one part where, I think it was their reaction to like someone like Murray the K.
Yeah.
Being on the radio and being loud and being very and they were not. That was like Murray the K was like a cat toy to them. You know what I mean? They'd never heard somebody like this. They were playing with him. They finding pleasure in this big, loud, brash guy on the radio that's
Yeah.
playing our records, that's calling us up in the hotel room, and they did. BBC didn't do that. But
Yeah.
anyway, sorry.
Ringo actually said this is a recent clip that Murray the K wasn't so much obnoxious, but he was loud. That's how he described him.
if you look at the Ed Sullivan Show performances, um, John actually looks least comfortable of them. I mean, Paul is right up there doing the introductions and being Paul, the way Paul is on stage. And certainly was at that time. But John is very serious, you know. Um, I think it's something that actually I hadn't noticed myself. Someone pointed it out to me when I was watching the shows with someone once, and I think it's true. I then looked, and John is there, standing there, playing, singing, but he just seems a little bit more nervous than everybody else. I'm not sure why, but could be that he didn't have his glasses on. Who knows?
I was gonna say that, he couldn't see that well at all without them.
Mhm.
So yeah. But when I watch this, I'm really keying in on their reaction to everything going on around them and whether or not they're truly enjoying themselves. Because, especially John was complaining in his interviews in the 70s how badly the Beatles were treated at times. They were performing fleas. You remember that expression? And, you watch them in 64 in this footage, and most of them seem to really be enjoying this. Of course, got to realize they know that they're on camera too. So, yeah. But I also think that this documentary goes a little bit deeper because it tries to explain this phenomenon. What is it about these four guys at that time that shook the world the way that they did? It was more than the music, and there was a lot of attention given to their hair, the length of their hair. But I enjoyed, there was a couple of comments from, there were two women in particular. Jane Tompkins was one of them. And she tried to explain the happiness she felt when she heard "I Want to Hold Your Hand." And she also compared this to Elvis Presley, that she never connected to Elvis and his sexuality. And the Beatles were like a softer image. They were four guys that didn't mind speaking their feelings, and even if it was emotional, it's okay to cry, that kind of thing. There was another woman later who said something similar to that. And I found that to be a bit interesting. How much of the Beatles' popularity at this moment was based on the music? How much of it was something else that most of us might not be able to put our finger on? You know, not just the hair, the suits, how witty they were, you know, when they were together in particular. You watch that first press conference at JFK, and they're hysterical. Who else was like that as a music group or an individual that could be funny like that? And nothing is planned. It's all spontaneous, and they were rare in that sense. But there's so many reasons why the Beatles achieved this kind of popularity. There's one particular thing that, we're trying to explain why the Beatles affected the world the way that they did. And at one point, Paul has asked the question, how do you explain the cultural impact that you're having? And Paul's saying, you got to be kidding. How could you ask me a question like that? They weren't thinking along those terms. They're just starting out achieving this popularity. But I think this documentary is trying to get to ask that particular question, to the root of it. What's causing this?
I wrote that down too. Paul has asked what effect the Beatles would have on Western culture.
Oh, yeah.
Says, are you kidding with that question? And yet, the Beatles were the zenith of Western civ. Let's face it. He just
But you
didn't see
can't
it.
expect them to answer a question like that when they're just starting out.
Right.
They don't analyze everything that they do. They're just themselves putting out the music of that moment.
Mhm.
So, you know, I'm
It was
sure that
great.
the others would be laughing if they were asked that question.
There's still a piece of me that is like, exactly how did that all happen so quickly here in America? Um, a record comes out uh, on December 26th, 1963. And if there's a buzz, if there's any sort of rumblings going on, fine. But this single comes out, and within 5 weeks or so of that, civilizations, maybe a little extreme to say that, society's turned on its head. But these four young British guys who were musicians doing the type of music that did not have staying power back then, or at least didn't appear that it would have staying power. How do you go from um, being unknown to having thousands of screaming teenage girls waiting for your arrival in the biggest, in one of the biggest cities on the planet? Um, we're seeing it all play out, and I still found myself asking, could it have been as simple as the aftermath of the death of John Kennedy? Could it have been?
I never bought that. I never bought that, and I was surprised that at this late date they still included it in this film.
They did a lot. In fact, they opened. I thought it was important to put that into perspective. And so like, I was not alive at the time. I know, though, Kennedy was assassinated in November 63, February, the Beatles arrived. Um, but it's very easy for a lot of people today to not make the connection time-wise, or how close on the timeline these events. But Alan doesn't think so, and I'm not sure. Could an event like that have triggered a pop music phenomenon?
Well, when this documentary opened with the news about Kennedy getting assassinated, my immediate thought was Al Sussman, who put out a book to kind
Hmm.
of explain that the Beatles' success wasn't so much about that, because if you're talking about attracting the youth of America, most of them, I hate to sound cruel, weren't that affected. It was older people, adults, who were affected by the president's assassination, and young people bounce back quicker. And they got to hear the music. They really loved the music. And I think a lot of people tried to ask the question, what's causing this phenomena? Maybe it's something beyond, the fact that the music is great. And usually, I'm sure the kids' parents were far more affected by the president's assassination. Not to sound cold about it,
Hmm.
but that's
Hmm.
how young kids are, you know.
Yeah.
Um,
I was a fourth grader at the time, and we were pretty affected by it. But I don't know that we were affected by it for months, like you're saying. I think we bounced back. I also kind of think, I mean, if you subscribe to this, well, we just needed something positive after Kennedy was shot. Take it, to a different logical conclusion. Are they saying that if Kennedy hadn't been shot, the Beatles would not have been what they were? I
hmm.
don't, I think they would have been no matter what was going on. I think they were on a separate track. I think maybe you can say to some degree it was nice having something nice and bright and happy and joyful after, that dark period when he was shot. But still, if he hadn't been shot, I think they'd have been just as big.
I
It's
agree with you. Yeah.
Hmm.
So,
I mean, I guess this is a plus when discussing this film because it's triggering this type conversation, and going back and just giving you a little time. I guess it's like a time, I don't know, this look at this brief period of time in February 64 where cultures collided, generations collided, and look what came out of it. Um, and if that's the case, then success on the part of David Tedeschi and Martin Scorsese, with their film. I mean, we've talked about this in the past. I know, especially Ken and I feel like it's very difficult to listen to an album. You listen to it once, and you have to put your opinion out
hmm.
there, and it's very difficult to do that because your opinion's going to change. You know, I just noticed I'm wearing a David Gilmour shirt. And a good example of that is as much as I love Pink Floyd, the new David Gilmour album, the first time I listened to it, I liked it. And if I was doing a podcast on it then, I might not have been as into it. But after 3 or 4 or 5 listens, suddenly it clicked. Now, this I found to be my reaction to this movie. I spent the early part of the film trying to follow what initially to me was a disjointed, um, there was no narrative. We knew what was going on only because I knew what was going on only because I'm a hardcore Beatle fan and I know what's happening. But we have the Kennedy assassination presented to us first. Then we see the Beatles performing in Washington, D.C. Well, they jumped over the arrival and Ed Sullivan. Now we're on the train. I'm assuming that was the train to DC, where the Beatles are familiarizing themselves, and again, I'm guessing here with the Maisley brothers camera equipment and seeing, some gadgets that they'd never seen before in modern filmmaking technology of 1964. And now we're back to the plaza. And then you see a little bit of Murray Decay, and then all of a sudden now Ed Sullivan's in the picture. Now we get a clip again of Washington, D.C. So that was throwing me as I watched the movie for the first time,
Hmm.
and was a little bit of a detriment for me on the kind of like, I was wondering about this, but now we're on something totally different. I did not respond to the Talking Heads as well as Allan did, not at first. I will admit guilt. I don't know who Joe Queenan is, but he was so overly emotional that again, first time I'm watching it, I'm like, pal, calm down, take a chill pill. He was right off the bat. Heard the Beatles, he's tearing up 60 years later.
Hmm.
But then when I did watch the film a second time, okay, all right, kind of fell into place a little more, the reaction. And he does pass a comment, I think, in that early on in the film, Joe Queenan passes a comment about not having, sound like he did not have a happy childhood. He made reference to, his, he spoke low, did not speak highly of his father. Okay, so taking this all in as the movie's going, and you come back to it then a second time, and okay, some of this is all falling into place, and I see what's happening. And what's happening is we're being presented to those who haven't really seen the Maisley Brothers footage, this much of it in one place. You're a fly on the wall and what that craziness was like in the hotel room. I know I was getting antsy sitting around in a suit, watching them sit around in suits in their hotel suite. It's like, guys, relax a little, loosen the tie. I mean, come on. Um, and as it went along I was starting to grab, things were jumping out at me that were very interesting, noteworthy things that I wanted to point out. Starting off with the Ronettes visiting the Beatles. Then I'm beginning to question myself, did I know that the Ronettes visited them? I think I did, but I don't recall ever hearing that they actually got the Beatles out of the hotel and up to Harlem, where the reaction to them in Harlem was nothing, which was very fascinating without saying anything obvious. That was a very fascinating part of the movie for me on how traveling just a couple of miles north in Manhattan, the reaction was completely different to these four guys from England. And then the interviews on the street where all the young kids are asked, what do you think of the Beatles? And they're like, they're good. And there was this one older guy who was into Miles Davis and John Coltrane, who said that he thought that the Beatles were disgusting. So again, I found that very interesting. And that whole part of here we've pointed out the racial issue of that point in time. Um, and other little things pop up then. And then Smokey Robinson, of course, elaborated further on how the Beatles embraced um, the music, the black music. And we know from the history of this country that at that time, not a lot of black culture was being embraced here on these shores, whereas in the UK, they were grabbing at anything that was soul and blues and Motown.
There was something
And
interesting
I'm sorry, go
about,
ahead, Dan.
sorry, there was something interesting about those two guys talking about Coltrane and Miles Davis too, that has some resonance with a contemporary news item. Um, at the end of when they're talking about that, they're saying, with the Beatles, there's like no comparison. And, you can see where someone who is into Coltrane and Miles would not think that 3-minute pop hits are really that interesting.
Mhm.
And remember a few weeks ago when Quincy Jones died, and Quincy Jones had made these sort of comments about the Beatles and Paul and all that, and called Paul and apologized. Part of Paul's explanation of, why he didn't really hold it against Quincy is that, Quincy comes from a real jazz background, and for guys who were from that background and into that music, what the Beatles were doing was not particularly exceptional. So I found that, that because Quincy Jones had just died and we had just sort of, revisited that whole exchange, having those guys say that I thought was really kind of interesting because it was basically the same discussion, but back in 1964 with
Right,
Miles.
right, right.
You
How
think that
about I'm sorry, Ken, go ahead. No, no, go.
you think that Quincy made those remarks because of his jazz background, or was it mainly because he was advanced in age and maybe, he didn't really mean what he said? Some people, as they get older, maybe he had signs of
That's
dementia
po-
or something. And
that's possible, but this was Paul's own explanation of why he felt Quincy looked at it that way, that he was a jazz guy, he came from a different kind of music, and that's at least what Paul said at the time. I think he might have even read it in the news.
okay.
But yeah, good
Coming
point.
from
He was old.
a radio angle,
Mm.
which Ken could relate to. I actually would have enjoyed, and maybe this is if someone out there wants to make a documentary about the Beatles' arrival in New York specifically, and the war that went on between the three radio stations, the three AM pop stations. FM was there, but nobody paid attention to it in '64,
Hmm.
and definitely not the youth. And you had in New York City, WINS, which still exists and is the biggest news radio station, old news radio station in the country. 1010 wins. You had WABC, which continued to be the music station, or one of them, up until when all talk. In what was it? It was by the 90s, or did it by the 90s, or was it in the 80s when WABC tossed music and went all talk?
That was in the 80s,
Yeah.
1981 or 82.
And then, of course, there was little old WMCA, which was somewhat of a powerhouse back in the day, and today has one of the worst signals, and I think is all syndicated programming, and people buy time on WMCA. Um, but this film only shows you WINS, mostly Murray the K. There's another guy from 1010 Wins. I don't know if they were calling themselves 1010 Wins then. I think they were. Um, there was another guy from WINS who was in the hotel, or was it a hotel? I think it was a hotel room, talking with the Beatles and on the phone back to the studios to Murray the K.
Hmm.
That was sort of interesting, and it made me think, you know what I'd really like? I wish there was a story, a book, a movie, or something where the three stations and how they duked it out to get the Beatles.
That would
I
be,
know Murray the K was big with the Beatles, but then of course WABC was calling itself WA Beatlesy.
Mhm.
And the WMCA good guys, as the DJs were referred to, had their claws, or were trying to get their claws into this pop phenomenon. But anyway, that was interesting. And very quickly, George Harrison on the phone, I guess with Murray the K it was, on 1010 Wins, and he requests
Got
Got
my
My Mind Set on You
Yep.
by Johnny Ray, if I'm not mistaken. Correct?
James,
I could,
James,
James Ray. George requested them that. You hear them playing it. And I paused it. I was actually watching it with my mother. And I said, you know that song. Um, from George's version in 1987. Well, now we've gone back to 1964, and George has requested it. So
hmm.
clearly, even back then in the day, which we sort of knew, George loved that tune from the first time he heard it. But here we are in '64, and George wanted to hear it played on WINS. Um, you know, you want to like stop the movie, jump in the screen, tap George on the shoulder, and go, "Hi, I'm from the future. My name is Darren. You're going to record this song in 1987. It's going to be one of the biggest hits of your career. Okay, see you later," and jump back, back to the present. That was cool.
There was another little, a couple of little vignettes scattered in different places in the film that were kind of interesting. And they were about how fans, both male and female, were trying to scam their way into the hotel or into their room. There was a couple of girls who made it up
I
to,
was impressed with that. Yep.
yeah, yeah. And then there was the guy who was claiming to be, there at their invitation, and no one was having it. It's kind of amazing because you look at those things and you think, okay, so these people think that they're giving a reasonably believable, reason why they should be there, but watching it, it's quite obviously not.
You
Uh,
got to give those girls points because one of them was a professional liar, and you could tell that she pulled, pulled things over on her parents, I'm sure, all the time. Um, because they're walking down the hall. They think they're on to the Beatles. Maybe they were on the right floor. We don't find that out, but they were close. And they were not afraid of bumping into anyone. And when a security guard just appeared, or a hotel employee, security appeared, she had all the, oh, no, no, just going back to our room. What room are you in? I don't remember. And I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute. I don't remember what room I'm in. Okay. And then they turned around and, it's funny how at the time, if a male would have said this today, I'm going to throw you down the stairs or something to that effect. If you don't leave now, I'm going to throw you down the stairs. Try that to saying that today.
Hmm.
But that's what, like, the security guards tells the girls, turn around, get out of here. I'm throwing you down the stairs. They had got close, but just missed the Beatles, and she was going to lie her way. I came to get towels for my room. It's around the corner. What room number? I don't remember.
But another thing that they didn't do this time that they have done in past ones, um, is showing that, Cynthia was there and that they would have to sneak her into the hotel room with a raincoat over her head. Remember that footage from the previous release?
Yeah.
Um, there wasn't much reference to the fact Cynthia was there. You do see her a couple of times, but no one calls attention to the
Right.
fact that she's there.
Right.
When you watch these girls trying to get to meet the Beatles, it just reminds me of I Want to Hold Your Hand watching the movie. I mean,
It also it also reminds me of my early days in radio thinking, I wonder if DJs get that sort of um a reaction from the girls. And I found out very quickly that no,
Maybe not
I'm
from,
joking. I'm joking. You can't.
but when I was 15, I snuck up WNEW FM to see Pete Fornatel.
Oh,
So
really?
yeah, it wasn't
And
romantic. It was just I
did you
wanted
get
to.
up? Did you get up to them?
Yeah, you know what? I got up there. I sat in the waiting room, where the receptionist was and all that. And when the receptionist got up to go away, I just walked into the studio and I first met their librarian, talked to him for a while and said why I was there. And he brought me over to, I guess Pete was on air or maybe one of the others. And we just talked for a while. And then I got Pete to promise to play me something the next day, but it was apparently locked in Scott Muni's Things from England locker, so he couldn't get it. But yeah, this is like what I was saying to Elliot last time. DJs are celebrities.
I bet you Pete was very receptive and cool.
He
No,
was,
having known Pete very well.
yeah, he was great. He was great.
Okay. So again, we're talking about, I think now no, I didn't refer to the movie early on. You didn't hear me call the movie Beatles 65, did you?
No,
no.
No, okay. Because I actually in my notes wrote Beatles 65 here.
that could have been because of
But
the miracles doing yesterday. And
oh yeah, that was another thing. That was another thing that when, again, first time through the film, and I'm trying to piece together just what's, doing and how this is being structured. To have the Miracles, I guess it was an interesting arrangement. I don't know if I'd heard their performance of that before, or if there is a recorded version of them doing Yesterday. But doing Yesterday, I'm like, but this is a 1965 song.
It's just showing that they're reciprocating.
Yes.
The Beatles
Yeah.
covered their song, so now they're going to do theirs.
Right. Yeah, and I got that again after thinking a little bit about how this was all unfolding. Um, Let me see if I have anything else in my notes. Another funny part that jumped out at me was I mean, Ringo calling the riser, the rostrum
Hmm.
that he was on. And I did often think in watching old footage of the Beatles performing, and Ringo's up there on this small, he always tended to be on a small stage, if not even rounded, to rise him up behind the other three. And it always did occur. I always did wonder this. I wonder if he's ever fallen off that.
He
And
did.
we see when they get down to Miami Beach, the stagehands at the Ed Sullivan Show down there have jerry-rigged a piece of, all it is a piece of wood screwed on that's going to keep his chair from sliding off. Probably not going to save him too much if there's any significant jostling here, but Ringo having a laugh about teetering on the edge so many times, and he says he did fall off the stage once, off his stand, rostrum.
He said in Canada it happened one
Right.
time. Yeah.
But
You you mentioned being disjointed in the film. There's one particular moment that stands out for me, and that's when Leonard Bernstein is shown, and they're playing She Said, She Said. So here's a documentary about 1964. They're playing a song from 1966. And I can understand why he's doing it because he's trying to illustrate how there are time signature changes in the song, and he's counting down in each bar. But why throw that in there with no explanation?
mhm.
It's like, I don't know. It's like some things were randomly put into the documentary. And I know why he's saying it, how innovative the Beatles were in time signature changes. Especially John did that a lot, and George did it too. Um, it's interesting to know that about the group, but why throw that in at that moment?
Yeah.
Right.
I think they wanted something from Leonard Bernstein to show that, the most famous classical musicians were into this and saw the value in the Beatles. And that was the best they could come up with because he didn't talk a lot about the 64 stuff, I guess. I don't know.
So, Leonard Bernstein did, and I'm admittedly not familiar with this, numerous specials on television where he discussed contemporary music because I
Well,
know that there was 63 and now there's footage of him listening to a Revolver track
yeah,
on
well,
camera.
that was from a show called Inside Pop, I think, which was a CBS documentary that it had all. It's you should try and find it if you can. It has Brian Wilson playing Surfs Up solo on the piano years before the Surfs Up album came out, and even
Right.
before I guess when they were working on
It
Smile.
was a Smile track.
Yeah. There's
Yeah.
there's actually a lot of interesting stuff in there, but Leonard Bernstein making a case for pop music as a viable, sophisticated kind of music. But he also had a show called The Young People's Concerts that was on, I don't know, weekly or monthly. I'm not sure how often it was on, but and each episode dealt with either a composer or a kind of approach to rhythm or approach to harmony or whatever it was. And there were a few of those where he brought the Beatles in as examples. Um, it was also interesting, by the way, in terms of when we were talking about all the kids trying to scam their way in. this girl wasn't trying to scam her way in, but if you remember, there was a Juilliard student outside the Plaza
Yeah.
Hotel saying,
Mm.
yeah, we don't really like rock and roll, but the Beatles, they're exceptional,
Yeah.
and
Mm.
she's got a whole stack of music.
Stack of sheet music. That was cute. So again, I'm actually really glad we are having this conversation because it is also opening more doors to the film. And, I'm looking forward to, really looking forward to seeing it now with completely different eyes. Would be the third time. Um, uh, the three of us, for those, because we're special, we got an advance, n not a tape, but it's
Yeah, we
a
got to watch it with
file.
our email addresses plastered all
Yes, that was.
over.
Yes.
So as I or Alan or Ken or anyone else who got their hands on these screeners, these links to watch it digitally, our email addresses were right across the entire screen. So I looked at Devivo at WFUV.org for close to 2 hours, and it was very irritating. So I'm looking forward to not seeing my name sprawled out over it when I catch it on Disney Plus. But I have to ask the question, what do I do if I'm watching it on Disney Plus and my email address appears on that?
Everyone will
All
write.
right. So any closing thoughts on the film Beatles 64?
I'll tell you, a moving moment for me is Harry Benson being interviewed, the photographer. And one thing that he said, you could tell it was very emotional for him to talk about this time in particular, but he said that John was kind of worried about um, maybe the Beatles' safety because he spoke about Lee Harvey Oswald and the
Hmm.
Kennedy assassination. He was worried about the violence here in America. Just to know that John was very conscious of that at the time.
And that it
Uh,
would be him thinking that way, knowing what we know.
right. I'd also be curious to find out when was it decided to make this documentary? Because it's kind of strange that there's a couple of clips of Paul in there at the Brooklyn Museum showing his own photos
Mhm.
from the book that he just released. Well, isn't this the timing is just right, you know? And you got Paul presenting some of his photos, some are right there on the wall. Um, did they do this in any way to time, possibly with the year and the anniversary and Paul's book. And so maybe this was only in motion for a year or something like that. Or did they have several years to work on this thing? Um, I like the fact that they went and dug a few interviews of like for example, Ronnie Spector, someone who's passed on, for her to reflect on that time. Um, and it's also interesting how they picked certain clips of the Beatles. Like there's a lot of anthology cuts in there. You'd think that maybe there are other interviews they could have picked from, but maybe they were the most accessible. I don't know if they were necessarily the best clips to use, but yeah, I'd be curious to find out when exactly this was started and was it done really to time with the anniversary. And wow, yeah, Paul put out a book with photos of that time, and you can get him talking about it now. So maybe as he was there at the Brooklyn Museum, they were already thinking, oh, why don't we use this? Um, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Uh, I love
There
all.
is what
I,
I'm go to finish your thought, Ken. I'm
yeah,
sorry.
I love the Lennon clips that they use. They use some from the Tom Snyder interview. Um, I like how they brought up the fact, and Paul has talked about this as well, that the Beatles are very lucky that um, conscription, that was the word they used, ended in England, and they didn't have to go into the army. And
Hmm.
he said that what was the exact? We were the generation that were allowed to live. And so if it wasn't for the fact, if all these great British artists had gone into the army, things would have been very different, the music scene,
Mhm.
not just the Beatles. So Paul has said,
They would have all come back and made crappy movies. Elvis reference here.
Are you guys aware of the fact that there's a soundtrack album?
Of this?
Yeah, I didn't know until yesterday, but I mean, now we get into it's available digitally only. So therefore, does it exist? And I'm going to hold my phone up here because of my Spotify account. Um, I don't know if you can.
How about
It's is it backwards or can you read
yes,
that a
it
little?
should, yeah, yeah. It just must be tracks from the box.
Yeah, yeah, but it's a 15-minute, uh,
Is it mono?
20 song soundtrack that release it on CD and vinyl, please, because we don't have enough stuff in our houses. But it does have the I've Been Good to You from the Miracles on it. It has the Yesterday Live on the Ed Sullivan Show, which they did not. I don't think they mentioned that that was the Ed Sullivan Show doing Yesterday. Smokey Robinson and the Miracles is on this. Barrett Strong, Money, That's What I Want. A Little Richard, Long Tall Sally, The Thing. That's what did, the rest of it is 2023 mix of I Saw Her Standing There. 2023 mix of Twist and Shout. This Boy, Roll Over Beethoven. Chuck Berry doing Roll Over Beethoven.
So we're talking about the Red Album, basically.
Remastered '09 versions of Long Tall Sally, Baby It's You. Um, It Won't Be Long. So, this is here. And, it's like, what do you even bother giving it an album cover when that's, you know what I'm saying? Don't get me on my whole thing with digital and streaming and downloading and uploading and just loading
Okay.
but,
I have a question I want to ask, and I'm sure probably somebody watching this, if Alan and Darren don't know the answer. The very end of the documentary, George is in one of the hotel rooms and he's playing the guitar to something that I can't recognize what it is. Um,
It's always been bootlegged as guitar blues, but I think he's just making it up.
oh, okay.
yeah. And our very dear friend Peter Jackson's Wingnut Films mentioned towards the end on the credits, and
Not
the
o-
Mal team.
not only that, Ken Womack is there being thanked,
Yes. And
and
Candy Leonard.
yes,
Yeah. Okay.
congratulations.
Did you guys pause it and look for your name?
No.
Because I did. I'm sorry. I just, I figured what the heck. But so that gives me an excuse to say, hi, Peter, how are you? Oh, how are things in New Zealand? We're thinking of you. Feel free to come on the show again. But anyway, should we move on to the fun? I give it a thumbs up. I think, yes, 24 hours ago, my opinion of the film Beatles 64 was it was good. I'm glad they made it. It didn't blow me away. I had some issues here, and already from just the second watching earlier today and talking about it with the two of you, um, I'm more enthusiastic about it now. Um, and thumbs up from Darren Devivo, and sounds like the two of you have would give it the same.
I think so. I mean, there's a lot of reasons to watch this film for the reasons that I gave to see how the Beatles responded to
Yeah.
this sudden fame in a country they always wanted to visit, even though George was already here in 63. But, for the four of them together to experience what they did and how they took it all in and to be exposed to American culture, the DJs. And I'm wondering myself, Darren, since you brought it up, why was Murray the K, chosen so much to be interviewing them? And cousin Brucey interviewed them. But
Well, yeah, that's like what I wondered that myself. Why was it just WINS footage? Because there were WABC involvement in that whole period, those days in New York. And I
I
assume WMCA too.
I think he managed to sort of worm his way in a bit better than anybody else. Uh, you may remember it wasn't included in this particular documentary, but in other footage of the Kennedy Airport press conference, some of the press guys are calling out, "Tell Murray Kay to cut that crap out." And they look at Murray and they say, "Cut that crap out, Murray." So they already from the time of the press conference had, a little relationship with the guy. And
Right.
I guess he just sort of, swept himself in, partly on the basis of that, and then built a relationship in the hotel room. And I think they came down to the station too. So did they? Or was that all in the hotel room?
I think it was all in the hotel room.
Yeah.
I think. Well, of when you, what of those stations did you gravitate towards, Alan?
ABC and MCA. And yeah, those
Not
two.
wins?
Not really. Not really. Um,
And do you recall, now we're getting off topic here, but do you recall what was it about the stations that pulled you away? You didn't go to 1010 wins. You were interested in MCA though and ABC.
I don't know why I wasn't listening to Wins. I mean, maybe I was and I've forgotten, but I know that by the time I was really, really drawn into it and, coming home from school and listening for in case they were playing a new Beatles single, it was really just those two stations. And I think by then maybe Wins had already gone to news.
It was
Um,
in 66. They went to,
in 66.
it was in 66 that
Yeah.
wins went all news. And this was all kind of, all this dust kicked up when WCBS AM shut down about how it did
Yeah.
the radio landscape changed at that time, and Ken also, now I don't without math's involved here, so too young for you, Ken, but you would have later in the 60s been exposed to those stations.
Well, I only really listened to ABC in the
Yeah,
60s. And then even going into the 70s, as I gravitated more towards FM, if I listened to an AM station, it was always ABC. I
yeah.
never listened to the others.
And by
And
the time I was,
yeah, I was drawn to
by
the
the time,
DJs
I'm
too.
sorry.
I
Yeah,
loved the DJs on ABC.
yeah, oh yeah. Well, those were like, I mean, in a way, indirectly, Harry Harrison, Ron Lundy, Dan Ingram.
Yeah.
Late at night, I remember Gene Michael and Chuck Leonard.
Leonard.
Uh, they did something, and I think played a role in me being drawn casually towards radio.
Mhm.
And then the guys on WPLJ,
Yep.
which was my first FM that I went to mid 70s, went there because a girl I had a crush on in 1975, I overheard her say in the cafeteria that her brother listened to WPLJ, and I had the radar, and I'm like, "What's WPLJ?" Ran
Mm.
home to my dad's stereo, had the FM antenna on the roof of our apartment building, so we pick up FM everywhere, and PLJ, and that's how I ended up, you know, finding FM. But WABC, I never listened to WNBC, which by the time I was old enough, it was WABC and WNBC. I think MCA wasn't doing pop anymore, and 1010 Wins was definitely all news.
Uh-huh.
But
Now,
anyway,
for me, it was ABC, and then with FM, I listened to 99X in New
yeah, I
York.
remember. Yeah, Jay
In
Thomas.
Absolutely.
Thing is that
Rick Morty.
WMCA sometimes got the Beatles single before ABC. And so if it sort of seemed to you that it was time for a Beatles single, which I seem to have some radar for, it meant going back and forth between those two stations. And that that doesn't even count as listening, because the only
Uh,
time I'd have stopped winding the dial would be if they said, "Okay, here it is, the new Beatles song. Okay, I'm going to sit here for 3 minutes now." you know. But yeah, it was just going back.
And did you antagonize your parents in the car when you were pushing the AM presets from
Well, they
ABC to MCA to
they quite
ABC?
wisely got me a transistor radio with an
Okay.
earpiece.
Okay.
Those that's another thing in the film. Their pitch
Yeah.
Transistor radios, those are so cool.
I already looked on eBay last night. Thought, hey, you know what? You can't have too many transistor radios around the house. So should we jump into our fun? Um,
Special thing.
Thank you.
Okay.
First of all, let's again recap. This is the first show. If you not don't remember the beginning of the show, Beatles 64, the film here, part one. Part two, Plan of Attack is, and I know best laid plans sometimes get thrown out because I believe that I said that this show was going to be focusing in on the Living in the Material World reissue, George's album, and that best laid plan went out the window. We will hopefully be discussing that album soon here on the show, but today was part one of the Beatles 64. Part two will be next week. Again, we hope to have Bruce Spicer with us to discuss the music of the albums that have just been re-released. Again, it's the Capitol albums, I should say the US albums, the first seven out now, and we're going to talk about those on the next show, which brings me to this. We here at Things We Said Today have five LP bundles that we want to make available to five of you at random. Each bundle is going to feature 6 LPs. And you probably can't read this, right?
Upside
No,
down.
maybe I should do. You're going to get Meet the Beatles, the Beatles' second album, the soundtrack to A Hard Day's Night, Something New, Beatles 65, and the early Beatles, all on vinyl, the brand new mono editions pressed on 180-gram vinyl. These six are available individually. They are six of the seven albums that are included in the big box set. The big box set we don't have, and you're not going to win that. You're winning these. And five folks are going to come away with the bundle of these six albums. And I want to thank very much our friend Jennifer Ballantyne for making this possible and making these essentially 30 albums available to us, 5 packages of 6 albums. And what we need you to do is simply send us an email. Our email address is thingswesaidtodayRadioShow@gmail.com. I'll repeat, thingswesaidtodayRadioShow@gmail.com. In your subject line, we want you to write down Beatles 64 mono albums. Make our lives easier. Write Beatles 64 mono albums or type it in the subject line of your email. And then, of course, you have to give us your name, address, all contact information, because you never know if we have to reach out to you, phone number, if you're comfortable with that, email address, but definitely mailing address so we can get the albums to you if you win. And again, Beatles 64 mono albums in the subject line of your email. Can't guarantee you're going to be entered into this drawing if that's not there. Beatles 64 mono albums in the subject line, and a trivia question. Simple trivia question. Give us the answer to. Well, we know that this package is 6 individual albums, but the 7th album in this bundle that's not being offered individually is the Beatles Story, the double documentary that came out in the fall of 64. That is in the box set, but Capitol has not included, or I should say Apple, all of these labels and names.
Universal.
The Beatles Story is not being made available individually, so therefore it's not one of the 6. But if you bought the big box set, you get the 7 albums. That includes the Beatles Story. So of those 7, one of them was not on Capitol Records. What label and what album? What album was not on Capitol when first released, and what label released that particular album? Is it one of these 6? Yes. So give us the answer with your name and address, and phone number and email address and your favorite color, and have Beatles 64 mono albums in the subject line, and we will notify you probably by email if you won. And that process is going to be one of the three of us, or all three of us, are going to accumulate emails. And then we're going to go eeny, meeny, miny, mo, darts, and pick the winners and let you know if you won. Can you
And,
tell I've never done a contest before like this? I'm like so concerned that everyone gets all the facts down.
and only one entry per person.
Yes, because we have people, and they're in the other room, actually, here in my house and Allan's house. We have people available to us who will check. And if you send multiple entries, it's not going to be good. We'll know.
Okay.
But anyway, yes, please, one entry per person. And good luck. And I'm
And,
all excited because I'm like, oh my goodness, we're giving away stuff.
and we'll announce the winners
In all
on.
likelihood, the next show. Right.
Okay.
And we'll email you too. We'll let you know you won, and then we'll announce the winners. Again, in all likelihood, on the next show, which should be the Beatles 64 Part 2. And we hope to have Bruce Spicer on to talk about the music, the albums. I know that when things like this come out, when albums like this, when music like this gets reissued, there's always those people who are less than enthused. These are albums that originated in the US. And there are some that worship these albums because that's what we heard. Those mixes is what we heard here in the US from the 60s. Others don't want to be reminded of what might be perceived as inferior sounding mixes. But then there's also the thing that these albums were reissued already in two other occasions. And we could do a whole show on the two box sets, the Capitol albums, volumes 1 and 2, and it was supposed to be a 3 that never happened. And then the box set that came out in 2014, right? That would be the US albums box set, which was the US albums but wasn't the US albums. And now these, which then leads me to wonder if they would do a second volume of 65 albums, or is this all just anniversary of the arrival and that's it? But I yacked enough. Good luck. And again,
And
Okay.
you will find no one more enthusiastic talking about the American albums than Bruce Spicer,
yes,
and supportive of those albums too. And
Okay.
he'll
Yes,
explain why.
got all that. Yeah. Did Bruce write the liner notes
Yes.
to the individual albums?
Yeah. Yes.
I thought he made mention of that, and that might have been, I think he alluded to something he couldn't go into detail when he was on our show last,
Hmm.
which might have been the fact that he's wrote the liner notes to these albums.
Well, they're more like leaflets for each.
Well,
They're kind of short for each album,
mhm,
but he's definitely made a contribution for the whole box set.
mhm. All right. Let's tell folks what we're up to. Ken?
First of all, on my YouTube channel, Ken Michaels Radio, which I know makes no sense. It should be Ken Michaels Video. One of these days I'll change it. The most recent interview that I did was someone who was on our show here recently, and that's Aaron Badgley, who is authored that brand new book on George Harrison's record label, Dark Horse. It's called Dark Horse, the story of George Harrison's post-Beatles record label. And so we talked about some of the same things we discussed here, and I asked a lot of other questions that we didn't tackle on this show. So it's more in-depth more in-depth conversation about George's record label. I know that there's a lot of fans out there that, and I'm kind of like this way, We're fascinated by songs the Beatles were involved with for other artists. Sometimes George would sign an artist that he didn't produce or write a song for or played for, but he liked their music. So maybe the feeling is, if George liked this, maybe I could like it too. You love the Beatles, you might love their taste in music. There's a lot of similarities in the story behind Apple Records and Dark Horse Records. And we talk about that a lot in the show. So that's the most recent one. Aaron Badgley, Ken Michaels Radio. You can go to YouTube for my channel for that. And just before that, I did my Deeper You Go concept, where I ask guests to name 10 deep tracks from one of the Beatles in their solo careers. I will be doing the same thing for the group as well. Andy Nichols from the Two Legs podcast did one on George Harrison. On Talk More Talk, my other Beatles podcast, which is all about the solo Beatles, we just did a show on living in the material world. And so we're going to do one here as well when we're done with this look at 1964. So we all discuss the brand new box set, what we think of the new mix, the outtakes, and I discuss some of the things that you can find out about in the two booklets that are in the deluxe version of the box set. So that's the latest one. Talk More Talk, a solo Beatles video cast. Go to our YouTube channel, subscribe to that. We're also on all the audio platforms, same ones that things we said today are on. My radio show, Every Little Thing. If you want to listen, the easiest way to do that is by going to WFDU's uh, website, WFDU.FM, and go to their archives page, type in the words Every Little Thing, and you will find the last two shows that aired on the radio station. Each show runs for 2 weeks on the website. You can listen any time of the day. It's on demand, WFDU.FM. And finally, my own website, KenMichaelsRadio.com. There's a lot of features all throughout the website, loads of audio interviews. Some of them are fairly old, to tell you the truth. They can be 10 to 15 years old. And some of them are from people who have passed away as well. It's a great interview you should check out with Neil Innes, which was done not too long before he passed away. That's on the website. But yeah, and I've interviewed Allan. That's on the website. When he had his book that came out at the time, Got That Something? How I Want to Hold Your Hand Changed Everything. And there's Beatles Trivia, where you can win one of 10 great prizes. And I just added my last copy of Backbeat to throw into the mix, the Blu-ray of Backbeat, along with some of the current books that are out there, including the McCartney Legacy Volume 1. And again, that's at KenMichaelsRadio.com. If you can, please subscribe to Ken Michaels Radio, Talk More Talk, and of course, things we said today.
All right, thank you, Ken and Allan.
Okay. I'm going to keep mine short. You can actually read all about what we're doing in the description box below. And so you can reach me on Facebook, either at Allan Kozinn or Allan Kozinn Remixed. You can write to all three of us at Things We Said Today Radio Show at gmail.com, the very same address to which you will send your contest entries if you want these albums. We have a Facebook page, Things We Said Today video podcast. You can find us on the former Twitter. I posted the last show on Blue Sky too, so I think we'll try and have more of a presence there instead of Twitter. Yeah, we're on Podbean, we're on YouTube, we're on Apple Podcasts, basically any place you look for good podcasts, there we are. Okay, that's it for me.
Okay, and as for me at WFUV, could listen to me Monday through Thursday nights starting at 10 p.m. till 2 a.m. And that's Monday through Thursday nights, right? 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. and Saturday afternoons from 1 until 4 on 90.7 FM in New York City. And if you're outside of the tri-state area, stream us at WFUV.org. And we have an app as well. You can download the app and listen to us there. Now this week, we're filming this. Well, we are filming it. We're recording this on the 25th of November, Thanksgiving week, and I will not be on the air this week at all. But I will be returning on Monday night, December 2nd. Yes.
That
Monday
is
night, December 2nd at 10 p.m. is when I will be back on the radio at WFUV. And you can look for me on Facebook. I have 2 Facebook pages. Come to both of them, like one, send me a friend request, and we'll be linked up. And thank you in advance. And one more time, our contest, again, you want to send us an email to Things We Said Today radio show at gmail.com. In your email, the subject line, please, again, is Beatles 64 mono albums, okay, in the subject line. And then make sure we get your full address, mailing address. And if you want to include email, which will be in the at the top of the email or your phone number, please, that's fine. And we will pick 5 winners at random, and you'll win the 6 individually available Beatles albums that have just been reissued, mono, 180-gram vinyl. These albums from 1964 and one that actually was released in 65 in March, the day before I was born. And with that, I want to take a second to just wish you a very, 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 very happy Thanksgiving. Hopefully it's a wonderful holiday for you and your family and your loved ones. And I want to wish my dear friends Ken and Allan very happy Thanksgiving. And for Ken and for Allan, I'm Darren Devivo on Things We Said Today. See you next time. Take care.